Hi, welcome to this third installation of a video series that I'm calling UFT Web Recording and Testing. This series is about getting you familiar with a new release of the software, and that release is 23.4. I have displayed before you the UFT IDE, the editor, in other words, and I'm showing you a diagram to start with to give you an idea of what kind of script we're working with, and that you can see, you can get to this view by clicking on the View menu and scroll down to this thing called Test Flow, and that will show you this diagram. Now, the diagram changes based on what you have identified as code blocks or actions within UFT. And so it shows a start and end, and inside how your process is configured. It could be in a sequential mode, a hierarchical mode, and in this case, you're seeing it where one action is calling another action. So it shows one action inside of another action. It starts out with this cart test action and then goes to the filter check and returns to the cart test and finally ends. Well, also, to tell you more about this, the actions are, you can consider it for the new people, a block of code. Each action has its own set of code, and one calls the other and then returns. Also, you will see that there's a linking or some lines pointing to each component. That has to do with data or parameters in UFT that are being passed from the execution start into the first action and into the second action. So think of the actions as a block of code or a container that has code in it. And the code normally will be started or created by recording, a recording process. As you navigate through an application, then it will record events. You can also insert code yourself, and you can also use a couple of tools that generate code for you, and that's something we're going to talk about too. Now, I allowed you to see me. I don't normally do that. I just said, well, let them see what this engineer looks like, and maybe they can appreciate it. Anyway, enough of that. You're not going to see me for the rest of the video. Let's move on. I had started a document to map out where I was going, what you could expect to see in various videos. I wasn't sure exactly how many videos this would take, but I am getting to the point where it looks like it may take as many as 5 videos, but I started out thinking that the A and B and C would be 1 video each. But the first part, this part here that I refer to as traditional, that it took me 2 videos. So those are out there already, and we're into the third one. And the third one, I'm looking to try to cover as much as this amount of information. And let me scroll forward a little bit. And then the last one will get into a web recording and testing for SAP. So that's another interesting newcomer to the block, if you will. Now, that's enough said on that one. My plan is to really give you some insight into two tools that are available within the recording IDE. And one is referred to as OIC, and then the other one is referred to Object Spy. This one, if you've used UFT before, you're familiar with it, or you should be familiar with it, and it's still a good tool to utilize to identify objects on your web pages. But this one, the OIC, it is actually getting into more AI feature and functionality. So I think that should be an interesting one to cover in this video. And I'm going to get into how they work and utilize them to integrate into an existing script. So I have a script that I started showing you. We're going to go back to that momentarily, but I want to share a couple more things before we get there. So we'll be covering testing and recording of that UFT script. So there's more coding I want to add to it. Live, this is a live session, and we will get into that momentarily. Now, let me minimize this one, and hopefully the other one is up. You can see this. This goes into a little bit more detail about what we're going to cover in this web recording and testing session. But as I said, this one is more specifically using AI. So AI functionality will be integrated into the process. And we have a target application that's called Advantage Online Shopping. That's the web application that I'm using for this script, and we're going to look at that shortly before we return to the script or the UFT IDE environment. So be expecting that, and I may have a couple of closing remarks. Let me minimize that. So here's the application, and I'm just going to walk through it just real quickly, and then I'll get into more showing you what we're navigating through. Typically, we're going to click on this image you see here, the speakers, and once we do that, well, let me go ahead and do that real quick. It doesn't take long. We're going to click on that speakers, and it's going to bring up this page. We'll scroll up a little bit. We're going to open up the manufacturer selection in the filtering, and I'm going to click on the Logitech so that it will just give us one image, and that will be a product that we will go ahead and put into the shopping cart and then remove it from the shopping cart. At least that's the one I'm doing for the Logitech. But the design of that script is really going to work with all three of these selections. So each set of code inside the script will be able to work with either Logitech, HP, or Bose. Each one will navigate a little bit differently to test out different functions or features of the application. And I also will have a section that's going to look at opening each one of these so you can see what's in each of those filter items. So there are 7 items. We want to put in some code to navigate through that and see what's there. And that's a way of testing the objects on a page to make sure they're working like they should be. You also see a breadcrumb in one of them. I want to use that breadcrumb and go back to the home page. That's one way to return to the home page. We'll also see another way. All right, I'm going to minimize that, and sorry about that picture there. Go back to the IDE, and as I said, we were looking at this diagram. I'm not going to talk about that anymore. Let's move on to talking about the the script themselves. So you can see right up here for the newcomers, there are functions or the two actions that I mentioned, cart test and filter check. They're available here, just a click away. You can see in the Solution Explorer panel, and by the way, you have several panels that are displayed right now. There are information of the error panel, there's the data panel. You can click on that where input data can be added and manipulated. There are active screens, output panel, toolbox panel, and the Solutions Explorer, as well as there's an icon bar with icon menus, as well as a menu bar at the top and pull down menus all across the screen. And this stuff is dynamic depending on whether you have a script open or not, and you will find that it will change depending on what is done. All right, let's move on. Let's go ahead and talk just briefly about what the structure is of this script. The script name is Web Test 10, and again, we have the two actions. When you start out creating it, it gives you the names Action 1, Action 2, and so on. You'll also see this little local. Local has to do with, if I double click on that, you will see what's called the object repository, and it comes up. Here's an example of that. That shows you what's defined for that action. So for cart test, I can see everything that's been defined. It's collapsed. I can expand it so that you can see all of the objects on the pages that happen to be named Advantage Shopping. Many applications, web applications especially, will have different names for the different pages. That's not the case in this little application. But still, that doesn't mean that this application is not a little complex, not a little challenging. It is. And so we're going to see a little bit of that. As I said, we have a live session. Hopefully everything will go very well, but that doesn't mean it will. Sometimes UFT is a little difficult. I'll put it that way. It'll give you a challenge sometimes. It will do something different than what you expected sometimes. All right, that's all I'm going to say about the object repository, but this has a wealth of information, wealth of functionality behind it. It's worth taking the time to look into it, to learn more about it. And as far as learning, I mentioned the place to go to. If you just Google ADM help UFT, it will take you there, and you will find there's a wealth of information, a wealth of knowledge that's made available for you on the subject of UFT and what you can do with it and what you can expect. All right, with that said, let's move on to the actual actions. Cart test is going to be the main routine, if you will. And so now we're looking at the code. If you're not familiar with the code, most of the code that's recorded will be in object-oriented format. So basically, you will see that the simple one, the first one on line 2 here, is we have a browser advantage shopping, which is like an object that's going to have a method applied to it. And in this case, it's saying, hey, this is the browser window, not the page, but the browser window, and we want to maximize it. So that's a quick and dirty explanation of, we have the objects, and then we have methods that are applied to the objects, as well as there are sub-objects, if you will, So this particular object speakers category is on this page, and this page is in this browser. And as I said, this particular application, you will see that it uses that name everywhere. So that won't change much. Now, UFT might change the name here or here by adding a little tag to it to give it a unique name. But that's not something I want to go into a lot of detail about right now, but you will see that. And there's one right here, manufacturer 2. But I might mention a little bit more about that later. Okay, in talking about this particular script or this particular action within the script, you can see a statement on line 9, and it says run action. So this is a way for calling another action, and that happens to be the one we call filter check, and it would go to this one. So after just executing 3 statements, then it's going to call filter check and pass that data, the parameters that I mentioned that you saw on the start diagram or the test flow diagram. And excuse me, we're doing it, we can do it for multiple iterations or a single iteration. In this case, it's one time going to that filter check process and then returning, and then we move on with further events to execute. And this is a fairly large if-else-if statement that is going to check to see where are we going, what are we going to navigate to next, because then it does calls. In this case, a call to a function or subroutine called Logitech test or HP test. And I mentioned when we were going through the application itself, getting a quick overview or demo of it, there were 3 areas and Bose was the 3rd area. So I've got the code divided into 3 areas inside this particular action block. And so if we go scrolling down, we'll see that there's the subroutine Logitech test, and there's the code for that particular subroutine. But then I have only comments in the other subroutine and nothing in the 3rd. So we still have, is in terms of design, I'm an engineer, so I think in terms of designing a script to do certain things. I wanted to have the functionality built into it to actually test multiple legs of the application. And I found that in the application it had these 3 legs as far as manufacturing was concerned. There were 3 different brands, if you will, that were able to be processed for this Advantage shopping application. One was the Logitech products, and the second one is the HP products, and the 3rd one is the Bose product. Now, it's actually in the reverse order in the application, but I'm handling it the opposite way in this, and I'm not sure why I did that, but anyway, it's done. All right, so let me mention to you where we're headed. This is part of what we're headed to getting done in this particular video or set of videos. And it looks, I'm looking at the time right now, this is taking a bit of time, and so I want to be able to provide all this information to you. I think it'll be useful to especially many of the newcomers and those of you that are looking for more challenging ways of learning this particular product called UFT for web technology. All right, so in talking about what we're heading on doing here is we want to add code for this particular testing. And the navigation on this one is more like this. We want to select the product farthest to the right, so there will be a list of images, and we want to select the one that's to the farthest right, and then add to the cart with a button. There should be a button. Click on the follow-on page, and then click the shopping cart button, and we should see the checkout page display. And then on that page, we want to click the checkout button, and then that will get us to another page, but we're not going to go further with that one. It would actually display a page that would be showing registration capability or login capability. One of the two must be done in order to complete the checkout process. But we're not going to do that with this script at this point. We're just going to click the home link to get us back to the home page. So that's the process, which is a little different, just slightly different from the other process up here, the one we did for Logitech. Logitech actually doesn't do the checkout. Instead, it creates the shopping cart, if you will. It puts something into the shopping cart, and then it removes it from the shopping cart and then returns to the home page. So that's a little different than what we want to do with this one. Now, not only that, if we get over to the filter check, here I also decided, all right, one of the things that this one does, it looks at those check boxes you saw, and it's going to process one of them. It's not yet designed to be able to process multiple. That could be another round of testing, but the code would need to change a bit in order to do that. Right now, the code is designed for only one of the three to be processed at a given iteration. All right, so if I look down here, I've got some more comments that I've added to communicate to myself and to you, what am I planning to add here? Those 7 items that are there for the filtering, I want to click on each one to expand it, and then click on each one to collapse what is expanded. So that should be an interesting process to add to this. And one of the statements, I did a little test just to see what would it bring me. It allowed me, I used one of the tools, the one that's called the Object Spy. I used that to generate this line of code. And so it went, the browser and page is normal. Well, notice the _2 there. And link. So it used a method called link for a value called price. And that's one of the filtering. You can filter by price. And so I click on that, and that would expand that piece of that section, if you will, of the filter function. All right, hopefully you followed that. But we're getting to the end of this one. This went rather wrong. I hope that you will stick with me and see the follow-on videos. But this covered quite a bit of letting you know that there's capability, good capability in the UFT product, and this is the new release 23.4. I thank you for your time. So check out my follow-up demo videos that demonstrate using UFT for recording and testing web applications. The videos should be entitled something like UFT Web Recording and Testing.